All right, welcome to our closing panel here, Out of the Weeds and the State of the Non-Union. So we do have a lively, very frank group up here. Whatever we don't get to, I think everybody's staying for happy hour,
yeah.
Right? So if we need more lively discussion.
It's a Marine requirement. You can't, during the Marines, you can't leave happy hour.
Well, you can lead us all. So each panelist is going to just give a brief introduction, their name, their company, and their role related to cannabis financial services. So we did that a little bit earlier, but now we've got a little more time. And we do have a panelist that sent his regrets. He is a lead staffer for Promoter. And he said, I would love to be here. He ended up with an extra project on his desk from his boss. But you can read all kinds of things that they've been writing, and he was very excited to have been invited. So, Kevin, you want to start?
Happy to. Hopefully you can hear me. I'm Kevin McKechnie. I work for ABA. And as I said in the introduction, my job, together with my teammate Jennifer Hatton at the back there, we staff the Health Savings Account Council and something called the Office of Insurance Advocacy. And the intersection here is, the intersections with cannabis are anecdotal, and the way that it works was accidental in the sense that we operate an 800 number, and a huge number of people call that 800 number, and they want to know if they can buy medical marijuana with their HSA card. And the answer to that is an emphatic no. Not for the reasons, yes, for the reasons you might think, but also health savings accounts, what you can and can't buy with your card is regulated by the IRS. And cannabis is not on their list of things you can buy with it. And as a matter of fact, there's a very prominent exclusionary language in that publication. And so it started that way. But our responsibilities also include advising banks on how insurance works and doesn't work, and what the legalities are around it, what coverages you have to have. And in any given bank, there are at least 26 major policies, all of which have to interlace with each other. And so our role is to figure out the metrics of those, how healthy is the market, advise banks on how this works. Cannabis comes up frequently in that regard. And so partly because you all are nice enough to have meetings in good places, but partly because it was part of my professional obligations about 4 years ago or so, I just started attending cannabis events all over the country to find out what this was about and try to work it into our portfolio as part of our advisory capacity. And that's why we're here, and it's nice of you to have us.
Absolutely. Marie?
Hi, my name's...
Gotta hit the button there.
Button.
There you go.
Hi, my name's Marie St. Fleur, and I'm the interim CEO of the National Association of Cannabis Business. And we are a membership organization, and we work with operators and others in the field. And our focus is really to figure out how we work with everyone who's in the field to drive excellence and to really standardize practices. And so we work with organizations such as EMC in creating standards in various disciplines that is peer reviewed and that is voted on by our members. And we work to promote those standards and hope to equalize things across the industry. We try to provide technical support to our members in various areas of need, and we want to really try to advocate and educate around specific issues. And one of them very much is this cash management, which is a challenge for everyone in the industry at this time. It's good to be with you today.
And you just reminded me to plug, we work together on creating standards for cash management. Those release today?
Yes.
Are they there?
So I do want to point out my colleague, she actually should be on this panel, and that is Danica Scott, who has been with NACB, and happy to be joining her on the NACB's team, and has been working with Kirsten to help us push forward this cash management, which is released, and I hope all of you will get a chance to take a look at it.
Well, in these standards, we learned back in the day in another misunderstood industry in prepaid, that if we didn't create our own standards, create our own narrative, others would do it for us, and we'd spend lots of time and money back on our heels. And we did in that industry. So the idea here is let's get out in front of it. And like Rodney called us, go meet with the regulators, meet with the examiners, meet with the legislators, and just be transparent. and that's worked well, and so having those standards. The next standard we're working on is payments. So if you want a voice into the payment standards, please email me and just put payment standards in the subject line, because that's going to be a lively topic as well. Dan?
Hi, my name is Dan Crowley. I lead the firm's financial services policy practice. Kristen, it's good to see you again. I think the last time we did this was in our New York office before COVID,
Yep.
But thank you for having me back. I also want to just point out my colleague in the back of the room there, Barry Hartman, who has pioneered the firm's representation of cannabis interests. And so, Barry, your leadership is very much appreciated. It's the only reason I'm sitting here. So we have been working with a couple of different cannabis groups on federal legislation, and I'll be happy to get into that and to maybe pretend to be Colin from Mr. Perlmutter's office to give you some of his perspectives to the extent that I can. But let me just say that while I was in law school, I also did a master's degree in public policy in public finance, and I actually wrote my last paper in 1990 on the economic effects of legalizing, regulating, and taxing marijuana. So it's been now 32 years, and here we are sitting in a jurisdiction in which it is legal, but not regulated or taxed, which is sort of the worst possible situation. So I look forward to getting back to that.
Excellent. Adrian?
Hi, I'm Adrian Bruno. I am the founder of the American CBD Network.org, if you'd like to visit it. I'm a veteran of the United States Marine Corps from 1989 to 2004. Number 5. You heard CBD there. There's a reason for that, but we're at a cannabis discussion. When I started advocacy on behalf of veterans, this was really my thrust, was for veterans and for people that were suffering from PTSD, TBIs, and the other ways that cannabis could help. But CBD was a safe word back then. I'd go on Capitol Hill and say, this was circa 2015, CBD, that's the safe stuff, right? Yeah, that's great. Let me take you from there. Let me play the information game from there, which is why I'm here. I've expanded that advocacy. I've worked in about 27 different states to change access laws. I have worked at the city level to change access laws as far as access, as far as legalization, decriminalization, even retroactive decriminalization. Very familiar with the MORE Act, which passed. I also have 2 other advocacy associations that I work up here. I'm a hybrid because I work between the states and at the federal government level to move agendas forward. But again, my number 1 goal is to get access to this and get the data and the science, as they say, to folks, get the medical community on it, because it is life-changing, especially for veterans. You have a lot of veterans that have sleep issues. They have physiological pain. They have neurological pain. And I'm not going to rest until our suicide rates go down to where they're, I'd love there to be no suicides. I don't think that future is, maybe it is attainable, maybe not. But that's why I'm here. And I thank everybody in the room for your advocacy on behalf of this issue. It's vital and vitally important. Thank you.
Well, and thank you, Adrian. And his story has been so resonant as we go talk to even the most staunch conservatives of how can you not want to take care of veterans. He's got some really good stories, so if you corner him for drinks, it's well worth your while. So to kick this off, if we go back to our promise at the beginning in this morning, and we said that in this panel we would talk about the 3 T's, the transparent, traceable, taxable. And we talked about how these 3 T's have drawn support across the D's and R's, state and federal, IRS, law enforcement, and with investors and financial services companies. So we talked about the 3 T's help to promote legal licensed cannabis businesses, and it detracts from the gray market. Transparency is the enemy of criminals. As the saying goes, drug dealers don't take Visa. And the 3 T's drive towards fair and competitive pricing for financial services, and taxation on par for those legal businesses, on par with what any other higher risk legal business is going to have. So that's a lot of our panel discussion. In our pre-call, I have to hand it to Marie. We've got to get going, right? And she cut right to the chase with a key question. what can all of us here and in our circles of influence do to normalize cannabis financial services? And we first defined what is normalized financial services. What does it look like? Well, it includes an array of financial services: banking, payments, insurance, lending, retirement, investments, for cannabis businesses and their employees. A lot of the employees have a tough time with getting basic banking services. And that these services, this menu of services, would be broadly available in cost and services, again, on par with any other legal, highly regulated, high-risk industry. And as Linda, I'll quote you from when we were here in September, cannabis businesses, we were talking about high risk. You want to be categorized as high risk. And we had some folks in the room say, we don't want to be high risk. We want to be like a coffee shop. Like, well, you aren't, right? But you want to be high risk because banks and insurance companies and payments companies, high risk is a thing, right? We know how to deal with high risk businesses. We have rules, we have tools. Some financial institutions participate, some don't, but we know how to do it. And that I thought was brilliant in your panel before. So in our pre-call, we came up with 3 pillars of action, and we're going to talk those through in a minute. One was dispel myths and promote facts. So we've heard again and again that in this industry, there's a flood of information, but a desert of facts. And some of that is purposely misinformation. There's entities out there trying to put forth things that aren't true. And some of it is just a lack of available research and data. And this, Michael Flores and Bretton Woods does a lot of our research. We've got some research partners here. Second was educate, translate, connect. And do that across all 4 groups: financial services, cannabis, government, and media. And then the third was build and deliver rules and tools. So if we want to bring in more financial services companies, their execs, their board, their investors, they need to know what are the rules. What if we follow, then we won't get a consent order and get shut down, or we won't end up in an issue with our regulators. And what are the tools we can use to prudently and profitably serve this market without having to hire an army of compliance staff? And you heard a little bit of that in the earlier panel. So with that, if we go to questions for the panel, so Marie and Adrian, as voices for your members of cannabis and CBD businesses, what do your members experience in financial services now? Like safety challenges, operations impact, cost, and just availability?
All of the above.
Oh. It's the chair. There you go.
All of the above. And I think as I've worked with some folks who are operators, and it is a challenge. And it is with the permitting process. You need money up front. For any business, you need startup costs. And unless you have it readily available in cash somewhere under your pillow or in your mattress, because you can't go to the bank and get it, then it's very difficult for regular folks to be able to start up. To be able to lease the property. You run into trouble because some leaseholders, folks who own the property, often do not want to work with you because they know you're going into the cannabis business. Moreover, if they do lease it, you're leasing it at a premium, and you have to, by the way, hold on to it in some states while you go through the process, right? So you have to have resources available for that to happen. And so that's an expensive undertaking. Then you think about the equipment that you have to purchase. Most people can actually go to a bank and actually get resources and not use their cash up front, right, in order to be able to purchase equipment. But in this business, you have to put everything that you have right up front. You can't go get a loan. There's no access to it, all right? And so that creates a problem for you. And then there's the issue of security. So even if you get it open, now you have the challenge. A regular business can go right into their local bank, and they can open a business account. They can get all the services that they require in order to support their business, but not in the cannabis industry. I can go on with the list of other challenges that they experience. And so we need to change this. What happened is and particularly in states where it became legal, we assumed when it was legal, we got it passed, we got the vote, everybody's happy, yay. Well, no, now the work really happens. And that is the work of continuing to advocate and educate. And that is, I think, is where we have to re-energize people, re-energize people who are adjacent to the business. And those are your architects who go out and build it out. Those are the lawyers who go out and represent you at the zoning board and at your local permitting agencies. You have to go talk to your bankers. Those are the folks you have to go back now and educate. And you have to go back and educate the people that you live with, because even though it got passed, doesn't really mean that they bought onto the idea. And we need to get everybody back on board, really dispelling myths about what this product about, the impact that it has on children and families, and get on with the business of getting it really legal. We just hit the first level. Now we've got to move it to the next where we're all accepting this across the board.
Absolutely. Real quick, Scott's report, the Newsbank report, I think he's got it on the desk over there. We asked that he capture some of the more current articles in security and domestic violence and things, and what happens when cannabis gets added in. So there's some really interesting articles in there. Adrian, how about you?
I'm going to try to be lively. I know everybody's been here all day. So I have a gentleman I work with by the name of Colonel Paul, AKA Bubba Deckert, and he always tells me to be lively with everybody, especially if it's the end of the day. So number one, veterans. Again, it's a big part of my thrust. Insofar as if the federal government has a huge thrust to put veterans returning to civilian life, transitioning, if you will, into different industries. And one of the largest industries they make a big push for is with the Department of Agriculture, veterans to ag, and put them out there. Cannabis and industrial hemp to some degree and whatnot, but cannabis presents a huge opportunity to veterans and a great way to transition. They feel like they're helping. They feel like the mission continues. Secondly, I am what most people would call a lobbyist, and I know sometimes like governmental consultant. I'm like, okay, call us what you will, it's fine. But I have been approached more times in advocacy on this issue. Hey, Adrian, can you help me find funding? I'm not an investment banker. I'm not even a banker. I don't even really know these things, but I have put together 3 different groups to fund several different entities in states where it's legal, which really isn't. So I'm happy to be here within the financial part of the conversation, because it's as a governmental consultant, putting together groups to invest in something is nothing I have any expertise in whatsoever. But it's been a number one question. And then at the state level, I've literally watched it. I have been to every state that's legal and been to all the dispensaries to see how they operate. We talked about this morning for a little while. What means of payment they can take, how they take it. Ooh, are they in the gray zone here with the payment they're accepting? So at the end of the day, I've been in this argument and dealt with everything from devil's lettuce to this is going to cause problems. What do we do about this? And I just have watched every minute argument come at it. I've watched states be kind of back in their way into this very incrementally. And yes, I have watched the enemies, so to speak, of cannabis, although I don't think they're enemies. They're just trying to delay things until they can buy a much larger stake in it, much like Mr. Elon Musk did, one of my other clients, with Twitter this past week. So all those challenges are out there. But the number one barrier to entry is federal illegality and no access to the financial system. If you can't fund it, you can't grow it. Is that good?
There's a quote.
Okay.
That is fabulous. So Kevin.
They can grow it. Oh, don't worry, they're growing it. But we got to be able to fund it and normalize it and get greater access to it. And to your question about domestic violence, I have long said this. In New Orleans recently, we passed legislation that not only decriminalized, but automatically pardoned simple possession to a certain amount. And, we want to get the jails not full of people that have been picked up for simple possession. I'm also a badge-carrying reserve officer in the city of New Orleans as well. So I deal with the impact on the criminal justice system, the medical system, the veterans healthcare system. All of these things would be alleviated with removing these barriers of legality, and furthermore, advancing the ball that I've seen the financial industry very wanting to get into, because they see the opportunity here, the great economic boom that this would be, especially to my home state of Louisiana. Oil and gas is not what it used to be, and we've got to figure out different things to do in Louisiana. We have a Renaissance project up in Northeast Louisiana. We have parishes. Sorry, we're weird. We do everything different than everybody else does. We have the Napoleonic code of law based on the French, not the English. But the bottom line is up there in those 4 parishes, East Carroll, Madison, Tensas, and Concordia, is the Mississippi Delta, some of the greatest growing region in the country, okay? Brought in a lot of scientists there. We have 250 million in outside investment going into industrial hemp. We all know what's coming in right behind industrial hemp, okay? That region hasn't seen any movement since 1850, when that's King Cotton, that area. Civil War kind of ended all that. So we have to bring in the financial system. We have to take down the barriers to entry, the legalities in each state and federal level, and we're getting there.
Well, and the whole social equity, just because you have a license doesn't mean that you're going to have a successful business. And the point Marie was making
It's not.
of you need to be able to go to the banks and borrow the money and accept the payments. So Kevin, with your 2 hats, advocacy for ABA and banking and Office of Insurance Advocacy and insurers, what's driving some of these challenges that Marie and Adrian were talking about from a financial services perspective?
Well, these are all worthy goals, and the problem isn't that the bankers don't want to help. The problem is that we're driven by one set of rules. And so all of the points are well taken, but until you change the foundational problem, which is, it's crystal clear that this is legal under federal law. There are no ways out of that trap. In fact, Secretary Yellen said just that today, I believe, or it may have been yesterday, which is there's a dissonance in state law and federal law, and the banks are caught in the middle. That's her quote. And so this isn't a kind of do you or do you not want to help a veteran? Do you or not want to address equity? This question is about the foundational problem that we have, which is our advice has to start at the foundational level, and it's illegal under federal law. Now what? Well, that goes across all financial services. Are there leakage points? Well, you've heard all kinds of them today. And this is an emerging entrepreneurial spirit that should be nurtured, but the rules are the rules. And so change the rules. Organize ourselves so that the rules can be changed. Our organization supports the Safe Banking Act. In fact, the grassroots group sent out, I believe it was a morning consult poll. 68% of the country thinks that these businesses should have access to banking. And I point out to everybody, if you just wanted to go and look where it's recreationally approved and medically approved, that's a bulletproof majority in the United States Senate. And so your problem isn't financial institutions. Your problem is about 4 miles this way. And anytime you want to, you can go see them if you want to. We do all the time, and that's what our team over here does. But until they decide otherwise, and the Safe Banking Act passed the House again, this is not unusual, right? And so they're just going to keep throwing that ball until at some point.
6 times.
Exactly, exactly.
Well, and that's been so much of the discussion, whether it was here over break or at cannabis conferences across the U.S., where the question will be, well, you're a banker, you got to be for safe, right? Because that's for the banks. And we've said that's great, but if your clients include regional banks, national banks, Visa, MasterCard, Amex, Discover, then you're crossing state lines, and SAFE doesn't solve it.
It won't help you there.
State
There's
lines.
some other nuances too that are interesting, and it's different in insurance because insurance is available to the cannabis industry in grossly expensive, horribly inefficient, surplus lines policies written on paper outside this country. Oh, okay. That's not going to help you. When we talk about normalization, I think what everyone here means is you can walk into a top 5 bank and get a loan. You can call your State Farm agent and get insurance, and you won't be charged what we're charging now. I'll give you an example. I have a $2 million umbrella policy, just me, and it costs about 0.1% in premium for that kind of personal line coverage. If you want $1 million of crop insurance, it costs you 10% of the cover. So it's $100,000 a year to insure $1 million. Well, that's less square footage than is in this area here in terms of grow. And so you can see how inefficient it is. And that's because, again, it's illegal. And I didn't pass the law.
Well, and talking about the insurance side, So we'll have people come up and say, oh, well, I've got insurance. My business has insurance. I have a dispensary. And we'll say, can we take a look at your policy coverage and what exactly it's going to cover? And then it doesn't pay out.
It doesn't, and Kirsten had her conference at a really good time. I know you wish you were with me, but I was just with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, party on, and before that, the Wholesale and Specialty Insurance Association, an even crazier crew, and there's special committees set up to do this, and every which way we can. I don't know how much dinner I've bought for people. There is no way to get this fixed unless you address the foundational question, which is federal statute. It isn't a lack of trying, and it isn't a lack of will. Nobody wants cash on the streets, which is the definition of why we're interested. The gentleman before you made a very interesting set of points around moral questions. Well, financial systems shouldn't be taking an interest in them. It's really a question of what's legal and what's not. And right now, this isn't legal, and that's sort of the intractable problem we all share.
So taking that, and then Dan, if you put on your hat of advocacy and policy, your banking clients, payment clients, cannabis clients, and a couple of the bills that have come up today are SAFE and more. Does the language in either of those solve it for your clients?
No.
How?
First of all, I'm also a registered lobbyist. I prefer citizen petitioner.
Former Secretary Zinke, who I was with last week, calls us subject matter experts.
There you go. Perfect. Well, his boss, President Trump, would have called us swamp creatures.
Yes.
I prefer airboat pilot. But
Yeah, it goes with Louisiana. I'm with you.
yeah. Anyway, the reason that the MORE Act does not solve the problem is that it will never be enacted. And the reason it won't be enacted is that, a big part of it, it's even in the title, is this idea of expungement. And that's just a very controversial issue. And the social justice issues are the ones that are keeping the SAFE Act from being enacted. And I think safe banking is a significant step in the right direction. It certainly would have more financial services providers servicing the industry with a higher comfort level, but it won't allow the national banks into the business for the very simple reason that if the FBI can kick down the boardroom door, it really doesn't matter that the examiners won't be able to ding you for not filing SARS reports, right? So there are other proposals out there. The States Act is a suboptimal attempt to sort of allow states to do what they're going to do within the federal framework that is problematic from the standpoint of interstate commerce. It would effectively balkanize the industry. There's a much more recent Republican-introduced bill, the States Reform Act, which is much more thoughtful and actually would accomplish many of the desired objectives. And, it's not just access to the banking system, it's the deductibility of expenses, right? 280E. Can you imagine if you were to tell a group of entrepreneurs, we want you to start a new business, but you won't have access to the banking system, your employees won't have 401k plans, and by the way, you won't be able to deduct any of your ordinary and necessary business expenses. It wouldn't get off the ground, and yet this one is thriving. And that tells you that when these issues are changed, we're going to have a very dynamic industry, presumably followed by consolidation, and not just in the industry, but in the trade groups, trade groups representing them. But anyway, I think we are moving in that direction, and the reason I hope that the Safe Banking Act will be enacted this year, and I believe that it will. Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has told me personally that he thinks that's possible, is because it will immediately require follow-on legislation to fix all the problems that are not corrected by the Safe Banking Act.
Go ahead.
Echo some concerns there. I went to a college with a guy named Steve. I'll tell you about Steve a little bit later on as we go forward in this conversation. Steve and I were active in the Young Republicans together. Steve and I were active in every political race that he's ever run in. Long story short, I agree completely. And The MORE Act has too much in it that the Republicans, I was hopeful that we could do this through some sort of reconciliation process, which I had to correct myself with 2 colleagues. No, it takes 60 votes. And there's simply too much language in the MORE Act that's unpalatable to a lot of Republicans. Safe fact, yes, Steve, who I talked about, I went to school with at LSU and was his aide at one point in time, he has told me that he thinks it's possible that it could pass.
Is this the one that was president of the Louisiana Wires?
No, Steve did not quite get to that point.
Oh.
But I did bring Steve here in 1999 to woo the Young Republican National Convention to Louisiana. And we got interviewed at night, and then the same Steve and I ran from the Capitol to the Lincoln Monument and back. That's a long way. It was a good run, even for a Marine. But the point is...
What year was that?
That was 1999. So the point is that we need to be somewhere between the MORE Act and Nancy Mace's legislation, okay? Safe Act, yes, may pass, but what we need to do is we need to have more me types coming out and bringing the veterans out and just saying, look, enough is enough, okay? We need access. It has to be federally legal. It has to have the banking system involved. It has to work like other businesses work, just like you're talking about. That is what we need to get to. And eventually, maybe the political side of the equation will follow. But if it keeps staying in this, you know, we're balancing too much in the MORE Act that the Republicans don't like, or in this other piece of legislation that the Democrat, it doesn't address enough of the social justice side of the equation, we keep having this fist fight. So we keep trying to move towards something that will pass. Steve went to the Louisiana House of Representatives, then to the Louisiana Senate, and then ran for Congress. The same Steve was shot and is one of my best friends and close friends since 1989. We're fraternity brothers from LSU. It's Steve Scalise. Man's never complained a day in his life about getting shot hip to hip. I mean, the type of wound he got is the wounds that I saw when I pulled people onto helicopters. But my point is that I've got him on this issue, and he echoed the same thing that Kevin did. But I'm tired of the piecemeal approach to this, but I know the realities like you do. And that's where we are. So.
Well, just even on the 280E piece, this was back in July of 2019. There was a Senate banking hearing, and Crapo's holding it, and one of the CEOs from one of the largest MSOs stood up. And he said, most of my business is in California, and with 280E, I'm paying an effective 85% tax rate. And those who didn't know that, you heard this in the room, and the congressional staff up there, their eyes got real big. So it's like you had said, let's go start a business where you can't get banking and you pay 85% effective tax rate. But I will say, you can talk to IRS. Rodney charged us to go to our regulators, go to our legislators. And back in the day with prepaid, we too were being vilified and treated in a way that wasn't on par by the IRS. And we went directly to IRS Crimes Investigation. Said, what do you want to know? We are entirely transparent. Yes, there's bad players. They aren't at our table. And we were able to get a pilot project through, and we're able to get them to use a piece of technology that for them was dormant at the time. And it changed the way that those companies were treated. It was huge. But it's like Rodney said, we can't sit here and whine about it. You've got to be proactive and make sure you only bring the good guys, don't bring the ding-dongs in, because you're going to make us all look bad. Maria, it looks like
Yeah, no, I wanted to touch a little bit on the social justice piece, because I was a former prosecutor at one point in my life. And, I think when I think about my life in the 80s and the number of young kids that we put away for a nickel bag or what have you, and whose lives were totally destroyed. And so when I think about the social justice piece, that was at the center of the legalization. If you will go in any state across this country, that was at the centerpiece of the argument. But at this point, those folks have been left behind. And if we don't put them at the center of this conversation, and everything, now it's a money conversation, but it was a human conversation when we got there. So I do think that the appropriate thing to do is move it out of the classification, get it legal. But I think we all need to do that together. And I agree it shouldn't be piecemeal, but I am concerned that if we just move forward and don't acknowledge there's a human aspect of this that is never going to get corrected, because that's our history. And so perhaps what we can do together is agree that we all walk there together, no matter how you call yourself, big D, big R, little r, and talk about how we move that classification of cannabis and let it not be an issue, and start advocating from every corner, because I think that's where the change is going to really happen, is when you move that classification. But we don't want to have that conversation. And so the question for us then, as an industry, those who are adjacent to the industry, is would we be willing to link arms together and have that fight, have that real fight around, opioids are legal in this country. Gambling is legal in this country. And some parts of this country, there are other things that are legal. So we can actually, and it doesn't matter what, how you identify yourself. So I think the question is, could we link arms together, whether you're in the insurance industry or or the banking industry, or whether you are around social justice or not, and say that this classification has to end. And put the money into it, those who lobby, put the money into it and really do that real push to make it happen. That is the conversation that I think we all can have honestly together, no matter where we fall in the spectrum. Are we willing to do that?
In New Orleans, speaking to your point specifically, the data, and what we did in New Orleans was we basically decriminalized a certain amount, small possession, and we went back and we retroactively pardoned a lot of people that were filling up jails, right? The incarceration rates for African-American males were it was 88% higher. And I'm going, this is a major problem. You're 100% correct. That has to be addressed. That iniquity has got to be addressed as part of the equation. I completely agree with you. And what I like to do is when I go to a hearing, I take we call them a handle. Colonel Deckard calls them a half gallon, I don't know, whatever. Handle of Jack Daniels, and I set it on the table, and then I take a bag of weed and I set it on the table and get 4 people. And I said, if I pass this handle around till this bottle is gone, I'll probably kill all 4 of us. Or get behind a wheel and make very stupid decisions. If I pass this around, we're not going to do the whole Ziploc bag. I don't know, unless we have some very prolific users here. I don't smoke. I'm an ingestible type guy, if you will, or edible. But I said, that won't kill anybody at this table. In fact, most people will probably just go to sleep, especially if it's indica heavy. Sativa, maybe it's the white elephant. Maybe you stay awake all day and work. I don't know. But bottom line is, I'm not killing anybody with that. And to your point, it's perfectly legal. But the disparity between the way that this has affected the African-American community and the way that they've been incarcerated based on stupid simple possession, if you ask me, has to be addressed. You're 100% correct.
Let me just add that I was an MP in the Army, and I can tell you for sure that I never responded to a fight situation that was caused by cannabis. But getting back to your point, I agree with you. This was the 80s, and whether people went to jail was a function primarily on family resources, quite frankly, whether they could afford good criminal defense. The problem, looking at it from where we are now, is sort of the moral hazard. Where do you draw the line, and how do you know? And from the Republican perspective, it's sort of tantamount to the debate that's going on with student loan forgiveness, right? I think all of us could agree that there are big problems in the student loan industry, but when you start forgiving loans, what about the people that just repaid all of theirs? And so you get into those sort of moral dilemmas. But I agree with you in principle that if we can, straighten out the current legal situation, and my preference would be to regulate it the way we regulate alcohol, right?
The Canadian model.
Yeah, exactly. Then the social justice issues we should deal with in due course. My concern as a lobbyist is that linking them makes it exponentially harder to get into the end zone. And so I think a lot of times policy is incremental in nature. And when big things happen, like they passed the Dodd-Frank Act, it's the biggest seismic, change. Well, with the benefit of a little hindsight now, even Dodd-Frank was incremental change. And so I'm a proponent of incremental change, get what you can when you can, and then use that to keep moving the ball downfield. And that's why I think if we can pass the Safe Banking Act. It's not a panacea, it won't solve a lot of problems, but it's a step in the right direction, and it will necessitate follow-on legislation to fix more problems.
To play on what you just said about being an MP and you never broke up a fight, bunch of stone folks. So going to these conferences, whether they're government or cannabis or fintech, if law enforcement is there, they generally won't say anything between 8 and 5. But after like the 4th beer, you start getting stories. And they have said, look, you know, we're in these communities where alcohol is legal, and Friday and Saturday nights, the guys get off work, they get drunk, they come home and beat up their wife and kids, and we get domestic violence calls. They said you take that same community and you legalize cannabis, and the domestic violence goes down, get off work, get stoned, come home, beat up a bag of Doritos. They said they are real proponents, even in their communities where it's not a legal substance.
The cannabis will turn the 82nd Airborne Division into the Peace Corps.
Okay.
So true.
So Dan, you talked about the SAFE Act would require follow-on legislation. And for those of us who've been on the Hill, we passed something that's like another 4 or 5 years before there's even regulation to work with it. Tell us more about that.
Well, I think that it's inevitable that there will be an enforcement action because of the way safe banking is worded. It's, you know, you can't take enforcement action solely because the bank is dealing with cannabis businesses. Well, there could be other issues. And so there will be exams of banks that think they're safe. It's going to cause, you know, a hue and cry. But other things like, you know, okay, now we got access to the banking system. Does that mean we can set up a 401k plan for our employees? No, it doesn't. Does it mean we can get insurance? Not any different than today. And so the Safe Banking Act is very narrow, intended to achieve a specific outcome, which I don't think it will do, in the sense that the national banks will not be banking based on that. So again, it's a step in the right direction, and because policy is fundamentally incremental, it would be a positive thing.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that, especially on the insurance side. The insurance function in this country has been assigned to the states. There are 56 U.S. jurisdictions. Every one of them has a slightly different approach to this. And bear in mind, were you to print out a list of the members of the Senate Banking Committee, there's 12 each side. On the Republican side, 6 of them are from states where cannabis is illegal in all forms. You can expect their insurance regulators to take that view as well. They're creatures of state government. And so the work here is really all in front of you, and it's social. And social change can bring the legal change, and then you can, I think, achieve some of the goals you're looking for. But again, having just come from the Lollapalooza that is an NEIC meeting, we can confidently tell you the enthusiasm there for doing something about this is real, because they see the dissonance, and the regulated community does not have the choice of what laws to follow and what laws to ignore. Something to keep firmly before your mind.
So he went to the NAIC, and I know you guys went to NASAC, which is the National Association of State Treasurers and Comptrollers. Was it kind of like Ozzy upgraded from Lollapalooza, or no, it was pretty much the same?
There's zero chance of dancing and nudity at conferences like this.
Which is good, though. You look at who's attending, that's really good.
Absolutely zero chance.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
So we've got about 15 minutes left in this piece. I don't know if you guys have more comments, if people have questions.
I think your point on safe banking, it'll at least open up the ability to open up operating accounts. It doesn't take a cash out system. You still have a huge risk of cash out there. So I think, yeah, it's an incremental step, but it's got a long way to go.
No, you're right. And that's why it really needs to be done, you know, in the fullness of time on a comprehensive basis. But just taking DC, for example, I mean, here we are sitting in the nation's capital. We're inviting tourists from all over the world to visit our local head shops, where they go through this charade of buying a very expensive T-shirt and then being gifted a sample of cannabis, and or you're buying CBD and being gifted cannabis. But they can't take ATM or a debit card or Visa or MasterCard. They have an ATM there, so you pay a very high fee in order to give them cash, which I'm fairly certain isn't being fully accounted for, and they're certainly not paying taxes on it, if any. And we don't have any idea what people are smoking. We have no idea what they're ingesting because it's not regulated. And, you know, my good friend, I'm a Marylander, and we have one Republican in the Maryland congressional delegation, Dr. Andy Harris from the Eastern Shore, is an appropriator. And every year he introduces an amendment to prohibit the DC government from regulating cannabis, which to me is totally crazy. It's legal and not regulated and not taxed. It's the worst possible outcome. So I think, you know, getting the anti-money laundering compliance, you know, all the know your customer rules, getting them into the banking system is the only way we're going to get the cartels out of the system.
So back to Marie, your call to action for us when we were planning for this, like get stuff done.
Yeah, I really think first we have to deal with where we are, right? And where we are right now is we have to, and that's why I'm so encouraged by the standards that you worked on, because we now need to take that information, bring it into the field and help them apply it. Because we've got to give people some clear direction about how to manage the volume of cash that is coming in to their possessions right now, help them figure out how to keep it safe, help them figure out how to monitor, and the kind of monitoring tools that they're required to have and how they need to hire, all of that. We got to put some tools in the hands of the operators. Each state is different, and so we really need to get to know the folks in each state, because I think in order to help them apply it, I mean, that's why a federal change would make it life a little bit easier, right? And so that to me is one part of it. The other piece of it is that each of us here make a commitment to go educate someone else that sits in your position. Because we have to begin the same way, the same hand-to-hand combat that occurred in order to get it legalized in some of these states now have to happen in the boardrooms, right? And it's not, and these conversations have to happen. So for me, the reason why I'm so excited to about being at an ACB is because we vet our members. We want to create a space where people have some security and some assurance that the people that they're talking with are on the up and up, I guess, in order to be able to work with them. And so that is, you all are these folks that can go back and have these conversations in your states, in your boardrooms, in your organizations. I think that's the one piece. The second piece is we've got to figure out what tools, what opportunities, what toolkits that we hand off to people so that they will know what to do. I have no idea about your business because I'm not a banker. I'm not an insurance provider. I deal with people who are in dispensaries. I deal with folks who are in manufacturers, and they want help, but they don't know you, and they don't know how to connect with you. So what do we do to make that connection for people? Because government is not doing it. And so therefore, citizens, it's up to us, right? And if it's up to us, how do we organize ourselves to make that happen? And each of us have a network. Each of us knows someone. You know what the continuum is in your states. How do we make that connection for people? They need to know about insurance. They need to know about how to manage their cash. Right now, anyone who's opening anything, I've got a gentleman who's opening a growth facility. You know, VCs are wonderful, but you know what the cost is for getting that money? And so if you're a small operator, it's a huge deficit that you're buying right up front before you'll ever see a dime for all the work that you're putting into this. But with your assistance, we might be able to give people a workaround. So I think that is my thing, is that we take it on because government is not going to do it. And in the interim, those of us who are in the lobbying business, those of us who are in the advocacy business, need to get back into the business of advocacy, because it is a long haul to be able to change this law. So, and where can we find common ground to do that? And I think that's really important. So it starts with us.
See everybody on their phones. Let me give you my cell number. It's 504-390-6220. Text me, and I'll text you back my card and my association, and I can use all the, but if you want to come to me in happy hour, I've got a ton of business cards too. I can give you here, 504-390-6220. I'm here on the Hill. I'm in a lot of states separately working this issue, and it is very important to me. And the numbers don't lie. What you're talking about, the numbers don't lie. And I think if we we have a legislation that says we're federally legalizing it, minus all the 50 different arguments that you and I have to use. We're going to make it anybody that has simple possession charge up to this amount, we're wiping that one off the books from, say, 1980 to here. One of the things that comes to mind is there's a young man who's facing 30, 40 years for trafficking. And right down the road, there's a grow operation right down the road from him. I can't remember all the specifics, where their profits last year were something like $1.5 million a month. So what's the disparity? He's in the same state in the same piece of ground. He's looking at 20 to 30 years. Of course, he was moving a lot of marijuana, but at the same time, it's perfectly legal right down the road. What are we doing? So please get in touch with me. I encourage you, and let us advocate, because we also always need, industry to support us in the subject matter expert role, as Secretary Zinke said to me so nicely, swamp creature, like President Trump referred to us as, airboat captain, like you have. I like that. All of the above, and I use veterans as a running back, or Drew Brees. I'm a Saints fan, not defending anybody in the room. Drew's gone, but he's still around. Veterans seem to cut across a lot of different ground. We translate to the business community, to everybody, and so it's a big part of what we do. And I've had veterans be a key part of this advocacy to get the ball across the goal line.
And Adrian,
stick with the Drew Brees analogy.
You've got a good point. Anytime that we've gone to the Hill, if we've got multiple voices, so you can bring the veteran and the cannabis, we can bring the banking, you can bring the insurance.
Law enforcement.
Yeah.
I work with LEAP all the time. So.
And so all those voices together, then that staffer or member of Congress or committee, they don't have to go get those other voices, because they are charged to hear.
1 second on that. And that's why I got into this. I saw hundreds of different advocacy groups for cannabis assault the Hill here. I had already worked with many congressional offices here on fixing disaster. I've amended the Stafford Act a few times. I have the U.S. Disaster Response Coalition. I have the American Space Alliance, so I deal with the burgeoning private space industry a lot. I usually help people solve problems and find jobs. So I'm not all, that's my role here. And so I sought to create an umbrella organization. Veterans, big part of it. But to get all these other entities, even NORML, which got banned from a lot of congressional offices over the years, and come to them and say, let's all get on the same page, which is what you're saying. This is all legislation that we can deal with. Let's move that. And then we take some of the partisan politics out of the equation and keep hitting the big points like, ooh, this will be great things for our economy. It'll, help people's mental, physiological health. It'll improve health. It'll improve the economy. Wow, the financial system can get involved in this, which is extremely interesting. Normally, the financial industry and the pharmaceutical industry are hand in hand on a lot of things. This is an issue where they're opposed to each other. It's interesting. So
I want to also add, I think when we think about advocacy and we're saying about, but you're the best ambassadors that we have, because you've decided to take a step into this. Most people have assumptions about what cannabis is about and have these, I had them. I had a picture in my head about, ask my kids. I had a picture in my head about who was involved in cannabis and what it was about. And so, no, I was not one of these original people who went and voted in support. I was not. It came from someone taking the time to talk to me and say, come on, Marie, you know what? I know you have this experience and this is blah, blah, but go back and read and understand. I think we need to do that for each other because you're in this business. Looking at you, would your neighbor think that you're in the business? Would they know? Would they, I don't know. You know what I'm saying?
I've kept quiet because I don't want to leave you with the impression that some of these issues are central to the membership. What is central to the membership is I've never met an insurance broker that didn't want to help somebody if it was legal to do it.
Yeah.
I've never met that guy.
Yeah.
And I've never met a banker that didn't want to help you if it was legal to do it.
Yeah.
It isn't legal to do it. And the power of this industry can be unleashed if the arguments you're making are more cogently presented to what is a group of septuagenarian gentlemen from states where it's illegal. Good luck. We can tag along because we are in favor of safe banking to point out what this business can and can't do.
My father's 79, you know, and he's got a very thick New Orleans accent. I don't know how many of y'all been in New Orleans. Adrian, you're not partaking in this stuff, are you? And I'm like, I'd like you to know that your generation is the #1 growing market in this industry for all of your little aches and pains.
Adrian, my point was, you don't want us to care.
Right.
Okay? You don't want the industry to make judgments about what you can and can't do. What you want us to be careful about is what is legal to do. And that's the end of it.
Yes.
Yeah, and I agree, but you know what? You can help us say what is necessary for you to be able to be in compliance.
I have a very profound list.
Yeah, and so, but not all of us know that. And so not all of us know that. I think it's having those there's assumptions are being made when I look at that, dispel myths and facts. So you just dispelled a myth. It's not that you don't want to do it, but you want it to be
we're
legal.
Happy to, but the kind of advice that our office provides to bankers goes something like this. What do you want to insure? What are you currently insuring? I started by saying there are 26 policies. Not one of them covers what's called first-party claims. And so if you as an institution decide you're going to engage in a business that isn't legal, there's generally no insurance if someone who's usually a shareholder of the bank or the enterprise comes forward with a demand for money because there's been harm. Now, there's insurance all day long for third party, and so crime bond, right? We have all kinds of general liability policies when people in a bank do something they're not supposed to, and the bank's unaware. The bank's the insured party. There's always insurance for that. Solving some of those problems is what we do. It's how we study it. Happy to give that speech, but it's not along the lines of the power of your messages, which were you to aggregate them to your point, would probably go a lot farther. I would look at us as reference point and metricians. We can calibrate this.
But I bet you if I was going to change the law on some insurance point that you all are currently involved and haven't been in the legislature, I'd have a group of people showing up.
Probably would.
Exactly. So I guess all I'm saying is that here's an issue that can bring resources to this industry. How can we convince folks who are in the way, and it's not you particularly, to shift? I think we have to.
Some insurance people are in the way.
Yeah.
Something to keep in mind. Some banking people are in the way.
Well, and I will tell you, you know, what we're trying to do with some of the Senate Republicans is make it a law and order issue. Because if you don't have these state lawful businesses in the banking system, you're forcing them to do business the way illegal businesses transact business, which is in cash. And we've got, you know, clients who are showing up in the state treasurer's office on a quarterly basis with suitcases full of cash to pay their excise taxes. And ironically, you know, there's an inverse correlation between the leniency of the cannabis laws and the leniency of the gun laws, which means in a lot of these states where people are carrying around cash, they're unarmed.
Well,
I'm not going to touch that, but
this conversation can go on a long time because this whole thing is thick with irony.
You realize in Louisiana, the state is the dealer. The Louisiana State University and Southern University are the grow operations. And they found that, I brought this up to them, I said, you know, you guys know the minute y'all take that on an interstate, federal law enforcement can seize it. Ooh, didn't think about that. So Adrian necessitated convoys of state troopers in Louisiana moving the product from point A to the 9 dispensaries in the state. That's really crazy situation. We have state policemen coming and delivering, here's your bag of marijuana, there you go, thank you. And off you go. But you guys can't proceed with anything until we make it federally legal.
That's right.
Start point. So
My presentations are usually small and short because that's it.
Yep.
With lots of good stories. Michael, why don't you ask your question, and then we're going to do a recap, and then happy hour.
For you guys who work Capitol Hill, what do you find most effective? Advocating on positive benefit of change or addressing a pain point specific to the constituency of that member of Congress?
It can be either.
I would say the same. I have to craft my argument differently based on Republican, Democrat. Usually Republicans, I'm talking about the veteran wellness, because and Democrats get that as well too. That's an equal across the board nonpartisan issue. Republicans get the economic argument. Democrats are usually pretty easy. I walk in, I'm like, hey, and they're like, how can we help, Adrian? I'm like, man, I love you guys. Y'all are great. Y'all are good on this. And so both sides, I guess the thing is that both sides see their benefit, and our job is to craft it in a manner in which we'll move the ball forward, no matter what side we're speaking to. So that's the art of the game that we have, and the devil is in the details and how we approach it.
Isn't there a danger for the industry in not preparing for day one of it being legal? I mean, I think it would really help everyone if there was a vision for, day 1 through 100 after that happens, because, what we've heard today is Visa and MasterCard are already planning rules, and big top 5 banks are probably already, putting in plans in place once, they get the full green light. And so can you folks give us a vision for how this is all going to play out with the eventuality of descheduling, full decriminalization? What happens next?
Well, I can start by saying that the States Reform Act specifically addresses some of those transition issues, because it's sort of like the problem on expungement is, where do you draw the line? It's the same thing, how does a bank know which dollars are now lawful based on, whether the transaction took place before or after? So there are some very thoughtful transition provisions in the States Reform Act.
So we're going to do, are there any questions on that side? No? Y'all know the wines over here, that's why, okay. So we kicked off today saying that this is a start. We said that all of us here and our circles of influence are the people in the organizations of power. And it was interesting at break how many people came up and said, holy crap, do you know who's in this room? Like, yeah, pretty cool, huh? So the power to drive proactive, powerful change, the power to dispel myths and replace that with fact, and the power to successfully drive the EMC tagline that we started off with, the 3 T's: transparent, traceable, taxable. So then Rodney has inspired us and called us to proactively, you teed up the idea of a roundtable, or 2 roundtables. One that is with the credit union examiners, and one roundtable for the existing 202 credit unions in the space, and then perhaps any others that might be cannabis curious. So again, anybody who's interested in helping to drive that, please text me and put Rodney Roundtable in the subject line so we'll know. One of the things that came out too, as we talked about rules and tools, there are 3 of us here in the room from the US Fed Faster Payments Council. Payments wants to do this. There's all the issues that we've talked about with legalization, but there are tools. We've got Shield and PayQuick and AppBrilliance and Chima all in the room, all EMC good guys, being able to help serve, whether it's credit unions or the community banks. So we've got a way to serve right now. In the 1:30 panel, we talked about what can we do. Steve, you had brought up that EMC is kind of a tool for preferred providers. So kind of the good guys. And this is what we found back in the prepaid days, is the bank examiners would come up and say, we are following the standards, or if a bank is following the standards, then we know, if they're part of EMC and they're following the standards, we know we don't have to give quite the same root canal that we may. So working with you on standards, and these standards have checklists. So when we did it back in the day, the examiners at first said, oh, isn't that cute? The industry did their own standards or best practices. But then a month later, one of our banks came up and said, I can't tell you exactly what happened in my bank exam, but you know that checklist? That was in my bank exam. So this stuff really does work if we proactively go after it.
You should emphasize that more. We designed one for health savings accounts, and you get a certificate. So when the examiner comes, oh, you're approved by the ABA to be in this business. That's not what it means. It means you've been through a course.
Yeah.
But it gives them comfort that someone cared enough to design a certificate in the first place, and you followed it.
Well, and when the HSA Council started, I remember being there with you, and we were talking about what were the things that were important. And that was back when HSAs first came about, and nobody even knew what they were. So we've got a model to put together this structure to normalize financial services. Our 3 p.m. panel, Adrian, if you can't fund it, you can't grow it. That might be one of our quotes that we take away as bankers. And I know, Tony, at drinks last night, you were talking about all these banks, not all, a number of banks that are choosing to lend in front of just the typical banking. So there's movement for that. Marie, you called us when we talked about the to-dos, that each of us needs to commit to go educate one peer, maybe in our state, maybe our board, maybe our organizations. I would add to that, we're all in different states. If you're on the financial services side, go to a cannabis event. Each state has them, the associations have them. Come to the big events, MJ Biz or Cannapack or whatever. But go out there and try not to act like a stuffy banker. We always, at EMC, before these events, we have an afternoon before, we do a cocktail hour. So that everybody who's there, you've got cannabis folks there, you've got financial services. So when you get to the conference, you don't feel like you stand out like a sore thumb. And some of the best investors, partners, clients come out of those small events. So go to those. And then, Adrian, you called on us for advocacy across industry groups, cannabis, veterans, banks, insurance. Assure we're all on the same page. And that's what we've done in other highly regulated, misunderstood industries. We have to be there together. And I know, Dan, you were making the point too. We need a complete voice. If each one of us goes in individually, then the staffer goes, well, what does that entity say? What does that one say? But if we're all at the table together and say, here, we're on the same page, we all agreed to this, it makes their life simple. And we're all lazy. Make their life simple so they can help us. So in closing then, please join us in thanking our sponsors, K&L and Shield. And I'm going to ask you two to kick off happy hour in just a second. Your to-dos out of this is to go tell others. If you thought that this was a thought-provoking discussion, if you like the folks you've heard from, we need the power and the speed to this effort in the drive to normalize cannabis financial services. Our 3 T's of transparent, traceable, taxable, delivering on those 3 pillars, which were dispelling the myths, educate, translate, connect, rules and tools. There's a notebook here, or a whiteboard if anybody wants to get that. It's our cheat sheet. So thank you all for sharing your day. Linda, you want to kick us off, and Tony for happy hour?